Hello and welcome to At One with Animals, Conversations to Inspire. I'm Janine Upping. These conversations are in association with Animal Talk Africa and in support of the Global White Lion Protection Trust. Their details are in the description of this video. My guest today is an amazing, wise woman who I've known for 20 years, Clare Roper-Paris. We met at a group that was dedicated to esoteric studies and meditation in Plymouth in the UK. It was actually at Clare's house where I first met my animal communication teacher, Winter Worsthorne, where I had the most profound and undeniable experience of animal communication. Clare has always had a deep passion for three subjects: God, nature, and animals. These three vast subjects have been her sole companions for the last 5 decades. Over that time, her relationship with these has, of course, shifted and changed, always, though, with the motivation of going deeper, expanding ever more into the great sacred thread which connects them all. Clare spent years exploring, studying, and participating in the ancient esoteric traditions of Egypt, Greece, and later Christianity. She trained as a homeopath and practiced for over 10 years, which began to lead her deeper into the subtle realms of nature, deepening her understanding of the interaction between the subtle energy bodies of humans and the subtle bodies and energy structure of the nature remedies used in homeopathy. Having a strong nature child and wounded healer archetype at the deepest part of her core, Clare found deep affinity, solace, and wisdom with the nature realms, especially with animals. From this starting point, she began to hear the animals, and with training became an animal communicator. Since then, she has carried out many animal communication consultations, taught workshops and courses on animal communication, as well as given talks on the subject. Clare's ever-deepening journey into the deeper sacred mysteries led her onto the path of the mystic, which she has walked for many years. Her personal and direct experiences of the sacred, along with esoteric studies, have enabled her to teach workshops and groups about the nuts and bolts of inner transformation. She has found this to be as important for those who wish to connect more deeply with outer nature as it is for those who are seeking to come into alignment with their inner sacred nature, as ultimately like is known by like. Clare also works with Greek myth and with women who wish to come into a more conscious and empowered relationship with the aspects of the sacred feminine within themselves. The Greek goddess archetypes offer great potency and clarity in this respect, and when a woman comes to know how the different goddess archetypes are working within her, it can be transformative. Her work is now focused on helping people to align to their own sacred nature, whilst fully embracing the embodiment and physicality of life here on our beautiful earth. Clare works with the nature and animal realms, physical and subtle, in service of the sacred thread that connects all life on this earth. Clare is also an amazing Celtic and nature artist. Her work is, of course, inspired by the beauty of nature and the awe of those ancient Celtic artists whose intricate designs are a continual source of amazement. Hi, Clare. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been so looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise, Janine, it's always lovely to have a chat with you, and this has been a long time coming, so
Yeah,
it's great
absolutely.
we finally managed to be able to do this today, so
Yeah.
thank you
Yes.
also.
So there's so many topics I want to talk with you about. Your depth of wisdom has been a constant inspiration to me. But something I didn't really know about you until probably a couple of years ago was the amazing art that you produce. And I just want to, at the beginning of this, before we get into the depths, if you would care to show us some of your artwork and just tell us, some stories.
Yes. Well, the first one which comes to mind, and I think you commented on this when I put this on Facebook, and that was the white hind of Greenscombe. And it's interesting. Well, I find it very interesting because how that came about was we have woods at the bottom of our fields. And so I take the dogs in there most days, I suppose. And I know there are deer in there. And when I was walking in the woods, I had this almost vision of out of the herd of deer, seeing a white deer. And it was just in a vision. And I thought it added to the mystery and the enchanted nature of the wood. So anyway, that was fine. And I thought, well, I must try to capture that in painting. So that's why I created that piece of artwork. But then, blow me down, I was walking into the woods a month or so later. And when I was just about to go into the woods, in the fields just up from the woods, I saw some deer. And literally, physically there was a white deer. And I mean, it completely took my breath away because it was as if what the painting depicted was exactly what I physically saw then.
Wow.
But I didn't realize that that's what I would actually encounter physically because I thought it was just in a vision. So that was the inspiration for that. But that's why that particular one has a special place in my heart because, it was a vision become manifest in the physical, in the physical realm.
Yeah.
So
I love that one. I remember that one, and it is absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it really speaks to my soul, that picture.
Yes, yeah, thank you. It does to me as well, because we both know the white lines, the white animals have a special symbolic and sacred significance, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was that one. And there's another one which I painted because I wanted to try and portray all my artwork is really nature, symbolic, Celtic, sort of trying to embody and embrace the beauty and the sacredness of nature. So the next one I call the Guardian. And because dragons have long been a mythical creature, some say not so mythical, but as mythical and symbolic creature in myths and fairy tales, with particular emphasis to do with the fairy tradition, the nature traditions, and the enchanted earth. But also they have a very strong role as guardianship to the subtle nature realms. And this is, although we may structurally perceive them as a dragon, their energetic, psychic, spiritual structure is that of a guardian. And they are very strong and they are very precise in what they are guardians of. So I did this painting trying to depict the dragon as a guardian over the gateway into the hidden, subtle nature realms. So the guardian is at the threshold between one realm and another realm. And so this painting really is at that time, my take on this protective force which oversees and protects the gateway, the doorway into those realms. And so that was part of the inspiration for it. You see, I love playing with color in my art and the symbolic and the sacred and the nature and the beauty of animals and just weaving it all together intuitively, I suppose. So that's how that one came about. The other one that I'd like to share is the one, and this piece was actually a commission piece. So I was approached by a talented musician and singer who'd seen some of my work, which was in exhibition in Polperro, Cornwall. And she was producing a new record album. And she asked whether I'd do the artwork for the cover for it. And she wanted something which was nature orientated with a sense of the enchanted, with lots of animals, with a sense of mystery, and with the sense that she said it had to reflect the title song that the album was named after, which is called Evergreen. And this singer is called Carrie Martin, for those interested. And she is a beautiful person, and she writes most of her own stuff, and wonderful musician. So you track her down if you want to. And so she asked whether I could create something where the more you look, the more you see. So I just had a session with her and the producer about, well, what would you really like in it? What do you really not want in it? And then I listened to the song, and I had the lyrics of the song sent through to me, so I could get a sense of the feel. And I did this artwork for her, and fortunately it's been really well received, which is lovely. And it was, it was such a joy to paint, because I could let rip. I mean, I had the brief, but they were generous enough to say, well, this is the brief. We know the sort of artwork you like to do, so just do what you want to do. And so it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful to do. It's a joy to paint. And the cloaked figure in the painting is her, because she, in her other albums, would wear a cloak, and this was part of her theme and the way she approached it. But she didn't want to have photos taken of her wearing the cloak. She wanted it depicted through art. And so that's the figure that you see looking at the evergreen tree. So the actual image is very reminiscent of the lyrics of the song and the feel. So that one.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I really enjoyed doing that one. And I suppose the last one that I'd like to share about is something which actually I did as a personal piece of artwork for us, but I ended up selling it anyway, because it was in exhibition and someone really liked it, so they bought it, which is a bit of a shame, because I did it particularly for a particular room. So it's a triangular painting, because the room, it's actually this room where I'm in, it faces east. And symbolically, esoterically, traditionally, in various cultures, the sun obviously rises in the east, and it was depicted in Egyptian art very prolifically. And so I wanted to do a Celtic nature-based story of something which had an Egyptian theme, bearing in mind this painting was to go in on the east wall. And so I wanted, instead of doing Horus, the hawk of the east, I thought, well, I'm going to draw a painter buzzard, because I love buzzards. And so instead of doing an Egyptian sun, I did a Celtic sun with Celtic weaves and knotwork coming down. And so that was the theme for this particular painting, which I call Morning Hawk. So it kind of got a flavour of the Egyptian and the Celtic. So I have to say I love doing that one as well, but I've sold it now, so I'll have to do another one. My painting, if you like, is another extension and expression of the forces, the flow of energies which have always worked through me. I've always had a deep pull and draw to all that is sacred. So I call that God, and other people will call that whatever they feel inclined to call that, but the most sacred. So I've always had three things deep within my center, deep flows within the depth of my being, and that's God, animals, and nature. And so these have been my companions through life. And obviously as we grow, the way that we express that and we articulate that changes and develops. But painting is one of my expressions of trying to capture that and to create something which expresses what I actually feel and see, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not someone who is particularly drawn to most art. I love landscape pictures, nature pictures, rather than drawn art. But and perhaps this is because I know you, but when I see your art, I don't know, if it's like a soul connection between you and I that helps me understand the art on a felt level. But your art's just, it speaks to every part of my being. It's
Oh,
like
lovely. Thank you.
yeah, I feel it, and I think that's the point of art, is to
Yes.
actually feel something.
Yes.
And I don't normally, but when I look at your art, I look for the intricacies, and I connected to the Celtic myth and all ancient myth, of course, but
Of course.
but the nature and the colors, and I absolutely love it. So maybe one day I'll be one of those people commissioning you for
Oh,
a
yes.
wall of art, each wall.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I love it. I love working with individuals who have a particular something that they are seeking to portray through art. But I mean, the old Celtic artists, the illuminated manuscripts. I mean, I'm in awe of what they were able to achieve then. I mean, the complexity, the nuance, and I've always been able to sense and feel the sacred running through the weaves, because everything for them was interconnected. All the knotwork, all the spiraling, all the patterns, they weren't just patterns, it was the interconnectedness of the life force through everything. And that was part of their calling as monks, or illuminists, who would actually try to portray the divine, the sacred, through nature, through art, through this interconnected weaving. And I think that's why I was drawn to it. And it was really back in 2009 was when I first started to explore Celtic artistry, because although I'd always been interested in the illuminated manuscripts, I never thought for 1 minute I'd be able to even begin to draw any of it. But I got some books, and I learned, and I practiced, and I practiced, and I practiced. And after a while, it starts to flow through you. And that's the thing. The patterning, the life force starts to flow through me as the artist. So it kind of dictates how it wants to flow for each particular piece. And that's what I find fascinating. I mean, it just blows my mind how beautiful, how incredibly talented these artists were.
Yeah, I mean, any artist, especially one thing that always impresses me so much is when I see eyes that are painted or drawn. I mean, that's just like, how do you do that? How do you get that?
Yes.
That essence of a conscious being.
Yeah.
With a pencil. I mean, I just know I'm in awe of
I know. It is an art. It really is an art to capture the life force, or the essence of a being, of something which is multidimensional, but capture that on a two-dimensional surface. I mean, that's magic, isn't it? If you talk about magic, that's actually magic. That's the creation of something.
As you were talking about, what the Celtic, the Illuminists, what they were able to weave into the knots and the lines. I mean, I just got this image of, like an Egyptian tapestry, where you have all these stories running through a tapestry. And I just got the sense that maybe it's related, that the stories are the essence is running through the Celtic lines, is a story in itself that is not as kind of obvious as what an Egyptian tapestry would be, but that it's still somehow related. Would you say that?
I think that's absolutely true, because art, certainly for the Egyptians, all of their art was symbolic and sacred. Every aspect of every part of the drawing, every hieroglyph had a symbolic meaning, an energetic meaning. It was, and their symbols worked on multiple levels simultaneously. And how a symbolic representation was carved also had significance. Was it carved in relief, or was it carved into the stone? That changed the meaning. Hieroglyphs on one side of the wall couldn't be translated outside of understanding hieroglyphs on the other side of the wall, because they related to one another. So everything was interconnected with the Egyptian artwork. You know, the famous scene of the Judgment Hall, and it is one of the most famous scenes, which I know Wallace Budge depicted in many of his books. And when I studied that, gosh, 25, 30 years ago, the quality and the truth held within that image is such that although I first came to it probably 30 years ago, the depth of the truth and the symbolism still unfolds now, because these images, these symbols are timeless, and so they contain timeless wisdom. Budge, who brought out the Book of the Dead, I mean, this was in, gosh, was it in the 1800s or early 1900s? And I think he's probably the most well-known Egyptologist who started to depict and decode some of these ancient Egyptian mysteries. And when I was studying this, it amazed me how every single aspect of every single symbol had such depth of meaning. And within that one picture contained a blueprint of teaching and wisdom and transformation, which completely blew my mind. And I think that's the power of the esoteric knowledge, which obviously the ancient Egyptians knew and taught, and I think sought to preserve for future generations. And of course, they weren't the only ones. In systems of the East and the West, this ancient knowledge has been passed down. And in some respects, you know, although societies change and cultures change, if it's genuine, sacred, high voltage knowledge and wisdom, because it's outside of time and space, it is perennial and eternal. So that's why these teachings from thousands of years ago, when one decodes them, they are as relevant now for us as they ever were.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because they're timeless. And you know, humanity, bless us, we haven't evolved so significantly that we can't learn a lot from these teachings, whether it's through the Egyptian stuff, whether it's through the Greek mystery schools, whether it's through the esoteric Christian stuff. I tend to have found, I haven't done so much work with the Eastern traditions and religions. My focus has generally been with the Western traditions. But within even the traditional religious context, there is always a mystical and esoteric content. And the thread of that has its roots going way, way back. And so it doesn't matter when you reach the level of mystic, whether you are in this particular tradition or that particular tradition. There are so many overlays and overlaps and truth threads connecting all of this, that although they may have a different emphasis, a different slant, a different viewpoint, because the culture or the society was different. If you peel that away, there is fundamental principles which can be found throughout all of these sacred traditions. And you see that within Celtic Christianity and certainly within the Christian illuminated manuscripts. And so when you say that you can feel this similarity or connection between the ancient Egyptian and the Celtic, absolutely. There are different cultures expressing aspects of the same source. As we met all those years ago, and we both went through studies and teachings and meditations, this work has carried me through since then and informs all the work that I do, whether it's with animal communication, which may seem bizarre to people, because if I'm teaching, I've done a lot of teaching work as well as consultations with animal communication. That's one thing, but how does it connect to the ancient Egyptian or the Greek mystery schools? And yet, you see, I found that they are absolutely fundamentally connected, because from my perspective, those of us who are called to connect with outer nature, with the animal realms, the plant realms, the subtle realms of nature, however that's expressed, we also have to connect with our inner sacred nature. Because the deeper, in my experience, the deeper we want to connect and powerfully work with these realms, the more conscious and powerful our orientation and alignment needs to be to our own inner sacred nature, because like is known by like. And so I have found in latter years that teaching animal communication for people and to people, mentoring them, teaching them, apart from the initial stages where, for example, there are certain processes, techniques, ways of connecting to an animal. So you've got the technical side, but there's also getting to grips with, well, which part of the human do you think that the animal wants to connect with? Is it the personality, the human personality? Is it the human ego? Or is it the human soul? Well, I can tell you that most animals don't want to connect with the human ego, because they've been at the other end of that for millennia. So they'd rather not really connect with our ego. What they would like to have is a soul-to-soul conscious connection. And that's easy to say, but for us, the journey from our egoic, discursive, mind-based orientation to the soul is simple, but it's not easy. And so in order to go more deeply into animal communication and work powerfully with the animal realms and the animal collectives, work has to be done for all of us to connect with that part of ourselves which is in co-resonance with that part of the animal which wishes to connect to us at that level. I have found most people come to animal communication because they're either called, they have a deep calling. And I resonate with that because if anyone can hear my cat, I've got Rusty underneath the desk here. So if you can,
Maya's just come in now, calling out.
So he's adding his voice to this.
Yeah,
he might actually jump up on my lap in a minute. I think he's asking to come up.
No problem.
But anyway, we'll see what happens there. So what I find is when people want to learn animal communication, they come for various reasons. They've got problems with their animals.
Well, they think they have problems with that.
Or they think they have problems with their animals. They are curious about this whole realm of nature communication, or there is something deep and powerful inside that is unrelentingly calling them to go into that realm. So that's the first step, and so they learn they can learn the basics, and there is some success with that, and sometimes wonderful experiences can be had. It could be an amazing, uplifting, sacred connection that they had with an animal that draws them into wanting to connect more deeply with an animal. And so I call this the first phase. But then there comes another phase when people want to be able to hear animals and to listen to animals. And then when they run to the end of that first phase, there's a realization which dawns consciously, but often is also held in the subconscious, because so much of everything is held in our subconscious. And that realization comes, goodness, what happens if I really can hear the animals? Hello, sweetheart.
she's here for a moment.
I think Rusty's gone. What happens if I really can hear the animals? And then because the animal realm has an awful lot to say to us, but it may not necessarily be all the sweetness and light and all this fluff that perhaps we are initially well-intentioned, perfectly appropriately drawn to. And in truth, most of my work with animal communication has been in the next realm, where it is the relationships and the trauma and the ego-centered relationships that humanity has had with animals that needs to be healed, transformed, addressed, and witnessed.
And the witnessing is the hard part.
And it's the hard part. And when I broach this subject with people at the end of a workshop, it's very easy for me to gauge a person's energy field. And I can say that probably 70 to 90% of the participants will withdraw their energy because they are not ready, they're not prepared, they haven't got the stamina, they haven't got the courage, they haven't done enough inner work to be able to go down. The first stage is up, the second stage is down. And that's where the nitty-gritty of inner transformation, inner work really, really pays dividends. Because it takes a certain amount of courage and stamina to be able to keep one's heart open whilst communicating. For example, with, as I had to do, several horses who had come through the loads of dealerships. So they were from dealer to dealer to dealer to dealer. And someone was wanting me to connect with potential horses for them who'd come through dealers to see whether it was a possible good connection, good relationship. So I had to connect with probably 4 or 5 these horses. Each one was traumatized. Each one had a story to tell, or each one couldn't go into that story because it was so traumatic for them. Each one was desperate that that person would take them on. Didn't mean to say that horse was suitable, but such was their need, their desperation to have a loving, consistent, continual lifetime home connection and safety, that they were desperate. And so an animal communicator is a bridge, as you know, an animal communicator is a bridge between the animal realms and the human realms. But what I personally have found, because in my natural orientation is, and this may be unusual, I suppose, I don't know, is that I'm I find it quite easy to detach myself from a human-centric viewpoint. I've never been overly attached to a human-centric world. And so that's partly probably why I've been predisposed to animal communication and nature communication, because I quite easily, and I'm empathic, so I can quite easily see life from another being's perspective. And one thing I have found consistently over the years is that their view is so different to ours, and how they perceive us is very different than we sometimes would like it to be. But simultaneously, concurrently with that, what they offer and their hope and their desire consistently has been to form such a deep soul-to-soul relationship with the human. And that's always been there, apart from those who are completely shut down and traumatized, and then that's something slightly different. And so, I think this is the same with the spiritual path. The first bit for people seeking a spiritual pathway, so often the first stage is this ascendant. They may have a mystical experience, something which takes them out of the 5 sense reality, the normal world. And they say, oh my goodness, my world has just been opened up. Look at this. This is amazing. And that is absolutely appropriate. That is the spark, the trigger, which we need to open up our world, our limitations. And so we go with that for probably a number of years. And this is where the teaching comes in, the expansion, the knowledge, development of our psychic senses, and all this blah, 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 which is really good. But then there comes a time, and what I find fascinating, Janine, is all the esoteric traditions say the same thing. You have the ascent, and then you have the descent. Because there comes a time in our spiritual maturing where to go further is not an ascent, it's a falling. So to go up, we need to go down.
Totally. Yeah.
And so we have to go down into the depths of ourselves, into the shadow, into the subconscious programs and the conditionings of ourself, of our culture, society, patriarchal, the global system of patriarchy. And we have to start to shine the light of our consciousness on how we are bound to that. The programs which are subconsciously running from that through us. And that's very relevant with the animals, because whether it's the spiritual path or the sacred path of animals, they run parallel in my view. So much of what the animals seem to be calling for now is, as the outer patriarchal structures are collapsing, and they are, what is being birthed is a new interconnectedness, which was always there,
Yeah,
It's just it can't be witnessed or embraced through the egoic mind or through the false self of the human. And so the next stage is to go down into the parts of us where lies both what we don't want to see and both the gold of who we really are, or at least the pathway to it. But that has always been the path of the mystic, certainly the path of the shaman. And it's part of the ongoing and unfoldment depths of the spiritual pathway. And I guess really that's part of what I do now, is help people who are called to go really, really into the nitty-gritty of transformation. Because I think there's a lot of opportunity for the first bit of this pathway, but I don't see so much about to really guide people into the second part and to help build the stamina, the clarity, the willingness to embrace truth within themselves. And certainly what the animals need is for us to not project our fantasy onto them, but to see them in their truth.
Yeah.
Even if that challenges us. And the tendency which happens is if we don't do that, we don't go down, if we don't embrace that and have guidance, because we all need guidance, we don't build the muscle of discernment, which is vital. Especially if people want to go into the subtle nature realms. If an individual does not have discernment, which is a truthometer within their own self, then their ability to discern false from fiction, fantasy from real, trickster from genuine, in all ways, in all shapes and forms, hasn't been developed well enough. And building and developing our psychic senses without that can lead to problems. So again, that is the next part, animal communication, because when we're learning, it's very easy and natural and normal. I can't stress this enough. It's normal when we're starting out to go into the projective tendencies of the mind. Because until we learn differently, until we know what it feels like not to do that, that is often our default mode. And that's appropriate for the first stage, but that's not where we want to end up.
It's interesting. Astrologically, Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter, is a sign related to fantasy and sort of grandiose ideas, and that's very much where we sort of our imagination can run wild. And it's also a sign. It's about sort of finding our truth and finding meaning in life. It's a spiritual sign as well. So, and interestingly, the sign after that is Capricorn, and Capricorn is about discernment. So it's like even in the astrology chart, you have this flow of, and this is where karma astrologically comes in, because you have these fantastical ideas, and of course some ideas, even fantastical, can be real. But then you sort of have these ideas, and then it comes around to Capricorn, and it says, is this real? Does this work? Can this hold true? And also right now, Saturn is at 0 degrees Pisces. Pisces is spirituality. It's our connection to animals. It's definitely a part of animal communication. So you have, for the next, I think it's 2.5 years or so, the planet of discernment in the sign of nature. So
very interesting.
It's a perfect time.
Very interesting. To be
talking about this.
Absolutely.
Right now.
I find that absolutely fascinating what you've shared there, because it rings so true with what I've practically found to be true and relevant. And I think especially at this time, as you've said, astrologically, especially now, when there's so much going on in our world, it's even more important that we as a human community, connect with one another, but also understand that we are intimately connected with all the other children of the earth, of whatever species, whatever element they are in. We are all intimately connected, and what we do to one affects the whole. The times of individualism are over, because we now know that nothing is in isolation. What happens in one country does not stay in one country. It affects us globally. And if ever there was a time to really get to grips with this and to embody this, because, you know, so much of my work with animals, nature, and with the divine is not to go off planet, but to actually embody that in and on this beautiful earth. Because after all, from my perspective, we're here, we're on earth, so we're here to embody the sacred,
the work of this planet.
Absolutely. That's why, otherwise we wouldn't be incarnate here. You know, it's a difficult, challenging environment to be in because of some would say the denseness of the physicality, but from my perspective, the denseness only comes from the separation inherent, which has become inherent within the human beings. Every other creature and child of the earth doesn't have that sense of separation. The only ones who do are increasingly now are, particularly in the animal realm, are those who have been so traumatized. And this actually is affecting some of the animal collectives. The trauma has affected them. And so at the deeper level of this work, there is work to be done on that level within the animal collectives, which is not for the faint-hearted, which is why the preparation work is so important for us humans. But life is so inherently interconnected, and discernment is so important, because for our own well-being, we need to be absolutely on it as to whether what we are picking up is true or not. It's just the basics animal communication. Just a simple, when we simply connect with an animal, one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, well, how do I know it's not my imagination? How do I know I'm really connecting with the animal? With learning and with teaching, with practice and with validation, can't stress that enough. People are so scared of validation, but it's one of the biggest gifts you can give to someone is to give that to them. Inherently within that is their subconscious telling that they need to develop discernment. It's a learning process, so that, you know, an individual knows when what they're receiving is actually from the animal and when it's not. Is it a projection from their mind? Is it a projection from their subconscious? Is it a projection from the collective agreement about what those animals' characteristics are? And so that is what they're actually picking up: biases, prejudices, limitations. Is it a projection from the patriarchal global collective, which says that certain animals do not have a certain level of sentience, and that inherently puts a block on the communication? There's so many facets to discernment. And what I have found, because as you know, in recent years, quite rightly so, there has been an explosion of interest in not only animal communication, but nature realm communication, into the subtle nature realms. And the power centers of the earth. Now, some known, some very well known, and some completely invisible to the modern human, and not marked at all, but they're there. And what I have found in the work which I have done with some of those centers locally, as I now live in Cornwall, so local to me here, and when I was in Wales, local to me up there, is that this quality of discernment is as important when working with these earth power centers as it is with our own work, inner work, as it is with animals. If I can share this brief story about, because it's a practical experience of how this is relevant for those listeners and viewers here who actually are drawn to working with, whether it's earth, sacred sites, whether it's animals, whether it's getting to grips with their own psychic senses or their spiritual unfoldment. Because these power centers always have, if they're active, they will always have a guardian. If they're not corrupted, they always have a guardian, and they will always have a protective mechanism in place. Because that's part of the guardianship of a power center, because a power center, like a sacred site, isn't going to be left unprotected and open to every realm and every entity and everything to come in. Of course, there's going to be a layer of protection. So one of the things that has to happen if anyone seeks to work with a power center is to approach the guardian, because and this again, this attends to a level of human expectation, entitlement, and in some cases arrogance, although I use that word cautiously because a lot of the time it's very well-intentioned and well-meaning people.
Yeah.
So there's a level of caution when I use that word. But again, you see, because I'm quite good at seeing things from non-human perspective, from the perspective of guardians, they see a human wanting to work with that site. So the guardian first thing will say, well, why? Why do you want to work with this site? Because the guardian will say, well, I may not need you to work with this site. There may be enough structures in place that your work isn't needed here. And if you want to work here, do you have the qualities that I deem, because the guardian is a guardian for a reason, do you have the qualities that I need, which would be of benefit to this site? Now, bizarrely, in my experience, so many people skip this process and think that they either don't connect with the guardian or it's a cursory, oh yeah, that's fine. And I think we underestimate that at our peril, because if we skip that process, we automatically then go into the psychic protection of the site. And there was one site that I was working with, and it was very specific about what the protection is. And I don't think this is uncommon. So the psychic protection of this site was such that it would draw out from those humans wanting to work from it psychic projections, desires, anything that they wanted to see or to be at the site. The site would reflect back to them through their psychic senses or through dowsing. So whether you're a dowser, whether you are clairaudient, clairvoyant, clairsentient, if you skip the guardian part, you go into the protective mechanism of the site and you will simply see what you want to see. You haven't actually connected with the actual site. What you've done is, all that person's done is connect with the protective mechanism. And so when I was approaching working with this site, one of the first things that I was instructed, was to consciously engage with the guardian and not go beyond what the guardian of the site instructed was appropriate. B, to be clearly able to discern all the protective mechanisms of the site. Because if I was not clear enough in myself to discern the protective mechanism, I was not ready. I was not able clearly to work with what was behind the protective function of the site.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we need to be on humble ground when we're seeking to approach working with these power centers, because if they are such, then that indicates that the power that they contain or potentially contain is enormous. Otherwise they wouldn't be power centers. And such, if we are not ready to work with them, then it would be detrimental to our well-being to work with them.
Yeah.
And so it's another example I find of how discernment is so important, because working with the subtle nature realms at a deep level demands that we understand the beings which work within the etheric realm, the astral realm, the imaginal realm. We understand the protocols involved with working with the earth centers, the power centers. And we understand when the answer is no, that it's no. I remember when I was in Wales and there was a sacred site not far from where I lived in the woods. And I didn't really go there for a couple of years, but because it was hidden away and I didn't really know about it. And the path was very difficult. Path was cleared, so I went up there. And I had enough awareness at that time to connect with the guardian, because I was still quite new to this stuff. And I connected with the guardian, and the guardian said very clearly to me, well, why do you want to work here? So I said, well, because I feel drawn to work with you and I think it would be interesting. And the guardian said, well, that's not a good enough reason. And 2, you're not ready to work with me. So go away for a year, work on yourself. And if you still remember, come back in a year and then we'll have another conversation. And I actually took that seriously. And during that year, I did a lot of work, and I worked more proactively and consciously with the different nature realms, subtle nature realms. And through that process, A, I learned a lot. B, I did a lot of inner work and transformation. And that started to pave the way for me to work not just with the animals, but with the animal collectives and the subtle nature realms. And so when you talk astrologically about the times to come, discernment being the key thing. For all of us who are so drawn to working with the sacred earth at this level, I would say get with a teacher who can show you discernment in all things, whether it's the parts of yourself, how you use your psychic senses, how you communicate with animals. Develop it, because it's one of the greatest gifts can be given, honestly.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Did you go back?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And that's when the work began, because when I went back, and it was just over a year, it wasn't exactly a year, because I extended that period a bit. So when I went back, I was able to work with that site, connecting it with sites down here, and B, it started my work with some of the beings who are in the subtle nature realms, who are part of the protective guardianship of the sacred power centers. But you know, that was after a long time of practice and dedication on my part, because I got it, and I think partly that was because of the training I'd had previously on the spiritual path. You know, going into the shadow, going down into the depths of my belief structures and the woundedness, because you know I have the wounded healer as one of my main archetypes. It runs right the way through my biography. So through necessity, I have been predisposed to go down to the depths for physical survival when I was younger, because if I didn't engage with myself at that level, I would not be here physically. So you know, those of us who have the wounded healer, and those of us who have the shaman archetype blazing through our system. I mean, we all have the healer and the shaman to some degree, but it's when it's some of the prime archetypes. Those of us who have that know that we would never choose it. You would never choose to be the shaman. You'd never choose to have the wounded healer, because the initiatory experiences are absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. But that's part of the package of that archetype, and that's what we've signed up for. The key is to have guidance, teaching, mentoring, companionship, so you get through the cycle without losing your way in the underworld. And those who are aware of the myth of Demeter, Kore, Demeter, Persephone, Hecate, the sacred feminine mysteries, and of course that archetypal journey is also, in some regards, the female mystic and the female shaman. And those who have, with the Goddess Will workshop, which I've done, and the Goddess Will archetypal work, which I've done with ladies over the years, and I have a strong Persephone archetype through me. You know, just reading the Greek myth gives you a flavor of what's ahead. You have that innocent maiden playing in the meadow of flowers with the mother nearby, turns away, then suddenly the underworld opens up and she is abducted and taken by the Dark Lord into the underworld. So that is part of the shamanic and the wounded healer journey. Certainly. And if you know that doesn't alert us even on a conscious level to what the journey is about, I don't know what will. But it's archetypal. And the key is not to get stuck in the underworld. And that's unfortunately with potential shamans in the making, potential mystics, journeyers, nature communicators, all of this, they either refuse to go into the underworld. So you see would-be Persephones who still have too much of the maiden in them, clinging to the edge of the underworld, not allowing themselves to fall,
but having constant experiences trying to get them to go
exactly. So the Dark Lord will come again and again and again in different forms, because they refuse to go down, or they're down there and they can't get up. So they don't go through the whole cycle. They haven't got the guidance at the right time, or they're not receiving the archetypal transmissions and working with that, so that they can come up, not as Kore, but as Persephone.
So I'm just thinking, you know, for people watching, probably a lot of people recognize that hanging on to the edge of the
Absolutely,
So the
absolutely.
fear is perhaps not actually necessarily going into the underworld, but the fear of not being able to get back out. Is there anything
It's both. It's both.
Yeah, okay.
Because there is a tendency, not everyone has this, but there is a tendency within some of the new age spirituality of so much emphasis on light.
Yeah.
And I understand why.
Love and light
I just,
brigade.
I'm not love and light brigade, so it has its place, and we need light in this world. I mean, so I'm not being a down on it. But if there's an overemphasis on the light, if you are if Persephone runs absolutely through your veins, right? That means you will be addicted to light, and you will not countenance any talk, any orientation to what is perceived as negative, the dark. You will run a mile from it. It's got to be light. It's got to be above. It's got to be up here. Whereas if you have a Persephone going through your veins, or if you have a Persephone moment, such as a grief, the light part stops because you are pulled down into the underworld because you're going through a traumatic grief, right? But if you are, so that is when a Persephone moment happens. But if you're a woman who has Persephone running through as a prime archetype, you can see women in the New Age movement who are so addicted to light that they are hanging on to the light. As in animal communication, they want the good stuff, the Dr. Dolittle stuff. Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this the wisdom? Isn't this the light of all the animals? First stage. The second stage is to go into the underworld, where there is challenge, there is trauma, there is violation, there is all of this. And that will happen as part of the initiatic process, whether it's going into the depths of what the lives of millions of animals is actually like, those in intensive farms, those used in experimentation, those who are abused. All of that is the lives of millions of animals, right? And for the would-be Persephone, she goes into the darkness of the limiting, the violation of the dark patriarchal global archetype on all that is innocent, all that is feminine, all that is embodied, all that is sacred. So she will feel that. And her training then, as brutal and as harsh as it is, has to happen in that realm. And one of the key figures in that realm, which tells you it's not an accident, it tells you it's archetypal, it's patterned, there is a blueprint, it is programmed, is one of the principles in that realm, is the dark goddess, is Hecate. She is standing there in the dark realm, overseeing it, which tells you that this is, as brutal as it is, this is a path of great power in the making, great illumination in the making. But it only comes from being willing to go into the underworld, to be pummeled in order for transformation to really happen at the deepest, most potent levels. So that when the time comes, the principle of life, Demeter, comes back in and takes what was the innocent maiden, naive, not wanting to see anything of the real reality, that has gone. What takes her place is this transformed, luminous, powerful woman who has the capacity to see light and dark, to be able to travel in any realm that she wishes, because she has the stamina, the capacity, the tools, the weaponry, the clarity, the protection to go in the highest realms as queen of the heaven and as queen of the underrealm. And she can travel in both. And when a woman reaches that stage of Persephone, then she is the shaman. Then she is the one who does on behalf of others what they are not called to do. She is the light that goes into the darkness because she has the tools, the capacity, the power with the divine beings which assist her to do that work, whether it's in the animal collectives, whether it's in the collective unconscious, whether it's in the dark realms, whether it is in whichever realm, whether it's light or dark, she can do it. And that's the power. But the Persephone has to go through that process in order to complete the circuit training. And it is the same with animal communication, especially now. Our animal friends need those of us who are called to it, and I mean called, to be able or to be willing to have the stamina and the clarity and the presence to work with them at level, because that is where the power of transformation is.
Yeah.
And you know, it is incredibly potent. And I'm not saying it's easy, but then life on this planet isn't an easy life.
And it's not actually meant to be, not just because that's the
No,
same.
no.
I communicated with a horse some years ago now, very wise horse. When I communicate with animals, I sort of automatically connect to the spiritual soul connection rather than the earthly bound. As part of this communication with the horse, I got the wisdom that the best thing we can do for our soul is to live life as fully, wholly, completely as we possibly can. Go into everything, feel everything, experience everything. And I've just been having, you know, more and more understanding of what that means. And it's, you know, what you've just been talking about with the Persephone, Demeter, Hecate myth. It really resonates with that information. It's like, you know, sometimes when you have experience of communication, it'll take you years to uncover what that actually meant. And I think that was 2017. So 6 years later, it's like you've added to that. And it is very much, I think, for me, I think my calling to animal communication was a little bit different because I did come from that naive side. I came from the wanting love, recognizing at a very young age that animals were kind of a salvation for me, the place
receive
love, give love. But my intensity was so strong, I used to repel animals because I needed them so much. And that was something I found very difficult as I was learning animal communication, because there was this big need in me. And actually through astrology, I recognized what that block was. But now I love doing these interviews, sharing, you know, what other people are doing, because that to me is my gift, is to share. Although I'm still very much connected to the animals. But you know, so I still feel like I am of service to the animals, and I do occasionally do communications, but I recognize that that this need to go deep, to do the work, and the way you describe is like very much the phoenix rising. It's so, you know, it is, as you say, it's just so necessary, I think, you've said, not just in animal communication, but for any spiritual person, for any person who wants to be of service in any way, to do things authentically and, you know, with truth, with a capital T. They need to do this. And, you know, we just have to look at the world, and it's just getting darker and darker. And I really believe that that's in part the resistance we have, because there's so many people who are waking up but still hanging on the edge of the cliff and not.
And also, you know, we're in the times where, in order for humanity as a collective to move forwards, the collective shadow has to come up to be seen visibly, because as a collective we have not worked sufficiently well individually. You know, even that we have a lot of work to do, but the collective shadow is displaying itself physically in our world at the moment. And that the shadow and the false self, the desire to resolve problems using violence is far more appetizing still to us as a collective and individuals than it is to find a different solution, whether it's the dominant training techniques used with dogs or horses or any animal. The propensity for the human animal to resort to violence to resolve something, whether it's conflict, whether it's whatever it is, is still very much in action, which is why the shadows are coming up. So we are being confronted with what we like to keep in the shadows. So on an individual level, as what we do to one affects the whole and everything's interconnected, the more each of us individually really, really have the courage to go down into our own personal shadows, it will, through the law of connectivity, affect the whole. And there is nothing more powerful, not in an egocentric way, because again, some of the New Age teaching has turned some of the true esoteric teaching into a entitlement, almost narcissistic sort of thing. I'm not talking about that, but genuinely, the more we are prepared to go into our own darkness, what we hold in our subconscious, our own woundedness, our own trauma, our own sense of entitlement, our own sense of disconnection and separation, and what we bring up to the surface and heal and transcend and really integrate, that will absolutely powerfully ripple out to the collective. You know, you were talking about that communication you had with that wise horse, which has been with you for years. So that was the authenticity of that communication. I remember when I was, must be 20 years ago, I suppose, no longer than that. One of my horses, Lonesome, who was a wise old horse.
I remember Lonesome.
You remember Lonesome, no longer with us. Beautiful, beautiful being. But when he was younger, when I used to ride him, he was a fiery creature. He was a panicaholic, reactaholic, you know. And so for me personally, he was very challenging. And he triggered a lot of my fear, the fear within me. Some of it was survival fear, so it's absolutely justified, because there's a difference between primary emotions of the body, which serve to protect us, and secondary emotions, which come from our mental thinking structures. So I used to be fearful when I was on his back sometimes. But what was interesting, some of it was mine. This is where discernment comes in. Some of that fear was absolutely mine, because I was riding this half-ton creature who could react at anything really and chuck me off, right? So some of it was absolutely genuinely well-placed fear. And then when I was learning more about my own spiritual nature and I was just starting animal communication, I was a bit thick, obviously. It suddenly dawned on me, A, how empathic I was, and B, when I was on his back and I felt so much intense fear, almost to panic, that actually what I was actually feeling was his fear. Most of the fear that was actually playing through my system was not mine, because I was empathic. And this is the difference between highly sensitive people and empathic people. Those of us who are empathic, it's not to wear it's a badge of honor or woundedness. It's a gift and a challenge in equal measure, especially now, is I was feeling the fear, his fear, as if it was mine. And because I could not discern that, I took it to be mine. And therefore, I was doubling up the fear and the blocks between building the relationship between him and me. As soon as it dawned on me that what I was feeling every time I was on his back was intense fear from him, completely changed relationship. And then I had to work on myself and over the years I've had to evolve and develop this, because as an empath and doing the work which I do, I consciously take on a lot of feelings and woundedness from all sorts of beings and realms, because that's part of my work as healer and shaman. Take it within myself to transmute it. But one of the things I had to learn was the discernment between his fear and my fear, so that I could recalibrate and rebuild the whole relationship, to de-escalate his fear and to address my survival fears of being chucked off and injured. And over time, it completely changed. But without the discernment between what was mine and what was his, I was just lost in this overwhelming emotional content of fear. And so in that one instance, he was a teacher for many years in many different ways. He taught me so much, because he was embodying something which I just could not see. It was so close in my system, I could not see the wood through the trees.
Yeah.
And that's the key to discernment, especially if you're an empath, especially if you're an empath and you want to do spiritual work and you want to connect with the animal nature realms. You have to be able to discern what's you and what's not.
And it's like the key to it is actually awareness, and that's something that has to be built over time. And
absolutely.
Knowledge.
And then the next stage is, even when I was aware it was his fear, it was still playing through my system at 100 volts. So it was, even though I knew it wasn't mine, I had to build a container so that I could hold his fear without collapsing into his fear and just escalating any situation.
So did you have,
sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, when you say you had a sort of container, it was like you were feeling the fear in your body, but detached from the fear?
Exactly, because as an empath, I was feeling it anyway.
Yeah.
So the discernment was, firstly, differentiate between my fear, some of it was mine, and his fear. Right, what I'm feeling now predominantly is his fear. That fear wasn't going to go away because I'm an empath, and so it's my job, especially when I'm on his back, I will absolutely feel his fear. So then I had to build the structures emotionally, mentally, psychically, spiritually, so that I can contain that fear while simultaneously working with him on the ground and ridden work and all the rest of it, so that I didn't put him in positions where he felt such intense fear, and know how to respond to that when it arose in him and me simultaneously, because we were one. So what is his fear is now my fear, right? And so we worked out a system. That whenever he felt fear rising, A, I would feel it, and B, he would just stop, turn his head around. I was on his back, look at me. I would stroke him. We would both take a sigh, pause, and move on. And that was amazing, because it was psychic, it was empathic, it was practical.
And so connected.
Yeah. And it was working in relationship, not trying to, not allowing the fear to escalate to such that it was dangerous, not pushing him through the fear is what a lot of horse people do with horses. You just push through it, saying it was ridiculous, don't feel that. Oh no, I couldn't say that to him. He would just chuck me off. I mean, so, but what a lesson, what a teaching.
Amazing.
What a teaching.
This is the power that the animals have if we're just open enough and brave enough to listen and to feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I had an experience with Zach. You remember Zach, the standard poodle, after he came to Norway, and his little brother, who had lived with us, my ex-husband and I, he had died. They were both going to come over, but Ollie died a few months before, and Zach, I think he hadn't been here very long, in Norway for very long, but I was sitting reading on my bed and just suddenly out of the blue burst into tears. And I checked in with myself. I was not upset. I was fine. And I recognized Zach's emotion had come through me, and it was the grief of losing Ollie. So, our animals, they obviously feel grief, but they don't, and perhaps this is, animals that live with humans, if we hold our own grief or suppress our own grief, that perhaps the animals that live with us also don't have a clear outlet to their grief. And then in that moment, for some reason, I was just completely open, and so he was able to, and probably took some of my grief. We
absolutely
combined, let the grief for both of us go.
Yeah, I think that's so right, because from communication comes communion. And when our hearts are open, and I know Andrew Harvey has said this, I know that great mythographer, who was the mythologist,
Joseph Campbell.
He was saying about follow your bliss, and that I remember years back I listened to something Andrew. It wasn't just about following your bliss. where your bliss is, which is what opens your heart to this intense love, will also be where your deepest grief and your grief is sorrow is.
Yeah.
So love is always accompanied by suffering.
Yeah.
Because you love the most will cause you the most suffering and grief when it's gone. It's if you love animals the most, then when they're ill or the plight of animals will affect you the most, which is why we have to develop our capacity to see both sides of this.
Andrew Harvey also says about breaking your heart.
That's right. And this is what you had at that moment. Your heart was wide open, wasn't it? And it was open to allow the flow, not just of the love that you had, but of the grief. And I do feel exactly how you've articulated that is a splendid example of how our animal companions seek to have this flow of communion with us.
Yeah.
It's a whole new way of being with animals, with an open heart, an open soul. So there is a flow of joy, of love, and of grief, and of sorrow. But there is a balance. There is a balance between it all. There is a harmony. And it is such an incredible, intimate sharing. It is an intimate sharing. I remember earlier this year, one of our beloved horses, we had to let her go. And she'd been struggling for many years with physical ailments. And both her and I knew that she wasn't going to be a horse that stayed around for a long time. And we got to the point where a few months before we had to let her go, she asked me specifically to walk with her through this. It was an inevitable thing. There are highs and lows through this process, as is natural for the human. You know, for me, there were high points, low points, or maybe she'll get better, maybe she won't. But the thread through it was, you know, this is going one way.
Yeah.
And I've had this time and again with animals where we have the courage, where we have the stamina, where we have the open-heartedness and the resilience and the capacity to endure and take on the suffering and the grief, to walk with our animal companions through this process is such an exquisite act of service and communion, which affects not just our intimate relationship to that one animal, but it echoes and reverberates out to so many of the animal collectives, for those animals who are going through this process with no one, where no one cares what happens to them, no one cares of their suffering, no one cares about their transition into death, but they're utterly alone. And both my Starlight, my beloved horse Starlight, and a companion horse I had before her said the same thing. Walk this way with me, because you're not only walking it with me, but you are walking this way with so many others. And although at times it was very hard, and I would be in tears, I would be full of grief and full of love at the same time.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it?
Simultaneously, love and grief simultaneously.
Yeah.
In spite of all of that, I knew it was helping so many other beings. I would never know. I would never know the effects of this, but I just knew it would.
Yeah.
And when the time came, when the injection happened and she was put down, both myself and the vet, hats off to the vet who did this, brilliant, simultaneously saw her old horse companions there waiting for her. So independently, simultaneously, both saw this, and she just got up out of her body and just walked with them. And so this is where this wonderful example that you gave of this grief coming through you, there is this communion and there is this delicate dance, isn't there, between joy, love, and grief. But the more we can do it, the more we are open to it, the more we can do it. The work comes from doing that with our individuals to the collectives. And
I have to say, at that time, I remember it very well, obviously, because it was so meaningful. But that's kind of a little bit like what you were talking about in the beginning, where we have these moments that's, sort of like awakening. And then and then we need to do the work. And that was a time when I didn't try. I wasn't consciously open for him to feel the grief through me. I was reading a book with him. So my mind was occupied, and he saw the opportunity. Yeah, I was probably open without realizing I was open.
Exactly. The conscious mind was directed elsewhere, wasn't it?
So I would have blocked myself had I even thought about being open for that.
Exactly.
And I know that that's where the work is. It's getting to the point where you can consciously be open to that connection and flow.
Absolutely.
On purpose, meaning to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the work. This is the work of whether it's the spiritual path, animal communication, nature communication. It is to come out of the discursive mind. It's from here to what's here, not the emotional heart, but the heart center, such that our mind, our thinking no longer dictates the show. And part of that is understanding the programs and the belief structures which are held in the subconscious, which run through and into the way we perceive life outside of us. And this is the work. I mean, traditionally, as you know, Janine, through so many of the mystery schools and traditional religions, if you get beyond the political front of some of the religions, it was known that, the path is simple, but it's quite arduous at the same time. You know, it takes will, it takes commitment, it takes discipline. You know, I mean, a lot of discipline. Hello, I mean, there is a sense sometimes, I think, where people can fall into the trap of thinking that, you know, you just set a conscious intention and then it's going to happen. Well, no, it doesn't. Intention may be a first step on the path, but if you set a conscious intention, you've still got the 9/10 of the iceberg below the surface of the sea, which may well need a little bit of work in order to give power to that into your conscious intention. And I liken it sometimes to people who have this, it's partially right, but it's a very limited understanding of how to use intention. So I say to them, okay, so if your intention is to learn to communicate with animals, that's fine, but you've still got to learn how to communicate with animals. So your intention is the first step, perhaps, to seeking a teacher out or getting a book about it or going to a workshop, going to a course. But that alone isn't going to, in 99% of the cases, going to be sufficient. You still have to understand what it feels like to have the orientation, the openness and the connection to animals so that you can communicate with animals. Even if you say to an animal, right, I want to communicate with you because I have that intention, that doesn't actually mean that the animal wants to communicate with you, because the animal might not want to communicate with someone who comes at that level of awareness. So there are so many facets to this that need to be addressed, need to be worked with, and need to be opened up, unpicked a little bit more, because I think it frustrates people and it puts people off doing this work, because sometimes an understanding about how intention work doesn't match up to actually the reality of it. And so it puts people off either doing inner work or going into these realms, whether it's animal communication or anything else.
One last question for you, which is just coming back to something that you mentioned, the difference between being an empath and being a highly sensitive person. What's the difference?
Well, from my perspective, a highly sensitive person is very sensitive to subtleties of emotion or what's in the environment, and so can pick up when things are slightly off or when there's a certain vibe, or there's a heightened sensitivity to environmental factors. Sometimes that could be psychic, sometimes it could be emotional, sometimes it could be thought structures. So there is a heightened sensitivity, and many empaths can have that as well. But the main difference between someone who is highly sensitive to someone who's empathic is, for someone who's highly sensitive, there is still a sense of separation, if I want to use that word, and I use it advisedly, between them and what they are highly sensitive two. With the empath, there's absolutely no boundary. There is no differentiation. And so empathic children, and just briefly going back to Persephone, a lot of young Persephones are highly empathic because their egoic structure is so porous. They are not just sensitive to what's going on in their environment, it bleeds through into their little unformed or forming psyches. And so empathic children can actually act out the subconscious energetic contents of the environment because they have absolutely no filter to do anything else. So they act out empathically in an embodied way what is actually going on in the environment. And so as an empath, we feel as if it is us what is going on in the environment. So that if there is anger in the environment, a highly sensitive person can feel that there is that frequency, that charge in the environment. The empath may well feel that, but they actually feel it as if it's their own anger. So it's actually their anger. And that can be really challenging, really confusing. And it can set people up so that they don't know how to interact with environments, how to interact with other beings, other people, and it becomes a cycle of confusion and woundedness because they can't get the clarity within their empathy and differentiate what is their feeling, what is not their feeling. So sometimes for the empath, what's important is to actually go about building a strong egoic structure, which is counter to what some of the spiritual methods are now. Sometimes that actually needs to be in place because for some empathic children, their egoic structure is so porous, it just bleeds straight through to them. So that's the difference. Literally, I will feel when I'm walking around, I will feel in myself as if it is me, different frequencies, different emotions, different belief structures, and everything can come straight in. Now so I've done a lot of practice and I've done a lot of work to actually minimize my own personal suffering with this, to differentiate and to become empowered to know, okay, I know who I am sufficiently, although that's always an ongoing expanding process, of course, but I know that although I'm feeling this as if it's me, it's not me. Although on one level, it's so completely overwhelming grief that's just come right into my system, seeking. And this is how people who are empathic can almost become taken over and possessed by an archetype, by an emotion, and how it can cripple. This is the shamanic journey as well, because shamans are empaths extraordinaire. This is a journey of Persephone, and this is what, to some degree, can crush people because they are crushed by the weight of the forces which are working upon them, which is why the work in the underworld is to, we will go through this. The work in the underworld is to actually work it and to empower yourself so that you have sufficient power, luminosity, differentiation, tools to be able to withstand the great forces which are seeking you out, and that for healing or for other purposes, so that you can either just differentiate and witness them, or to heal them, or to expel them, or to deal with them appropriately. This is the path of the shaman. The shaman is the person who takes on dissonance. It's part, other people have other work, but the shaman is to take it on within themselves and to have the bandwidth, the capacity, the clarity, the toolkit, the stamina to see it. And that's the difference.
So is someone who is highly sensitive as a child not an empath as a child, can they, with doing the work, can they grow into an empath? Or would you say that the two are always separate? The empath can be highly sensitive, but
I mean, for sure there is an overlap.
I
mean, it's very, I don't want to sort of be black and white about it, because there is an overlap between the two. But there is also a differentiation between the two. I think more as a collective species, we are undoubtedly becoming more consciously psychic. Through necessity, I think we are becoming more highly sensitive and more empathic, because I think my experience is showing, so, and I'm guarded in this because it's still unfolding, so I don't want to be prescriptive about something which is unfolding. I don't want to be prescriptive, full stop. That one of the ways humanity has to evolve, a really good way for humanity to evolve, is if it feels the suffering that it inflicts on someone else as if it's their own suffering, it may be more predisposed not to inflict the suffering.
Yeah.
Because there is no separation between me and you. Yeah. What I inflict on you through good intentions, malintentions, ignorance, whatever it is, I feel as if I feel it too. Yeah. Because ultimately we are interconnected. And so
and we're projecting most of the time anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think so. More empaths are incarnating with that as part of their soul contract. I think empaths, we have to be careful with that word because I think it's overused. Yeah. And I think there is a tendency for those with empathic souls to, if they don't get the right training, to use it as a wounded badge. And we must not be victimized by this.
No. Absolutely.
In the early days, it absolutely can be victimizing, and that's the classic story of Clare. She is the ultimate victim, right? But we do not want to be victimized by this. We go beyond that. We transform the shadow side of that archetype, so that although we take on stuff, we aren't victimized by it. It's part of our soul contract.
Yeah.
So we become empowered. But I think it is a dictate of the soul as to whether one is born with this as inherently in one's wiring, and whether it's needed in an incarnation for someone who's already highly sensitive to go into empathic mode. It's not something that, I would have chosen.
No, not consciously, no.
No, I mean, really? I mean, not. Yeah. But it's part of my soul contract. And I think more and more humans are absolutely being born with that predisposition. But it's what one does with it and how one manages it that is vital.
I could literally spend the rest of this afternoon talking with you. I love talking. I learn so much. It's music to my ears, to my heart, to my soul. It always is every time I talk with you.
Oh, it's lovely to share. It's lovely to have this conversation. Yeah. And thank you, Janine. It's been wonderful to spend this time just having such a great conversation. I mean, it's what we love to do.
And I know how, you as a teacher, you are so wise. You embody everything that you've talked about today authentically. This is also a time where people are discerning true spiritual teachers, and you are a true spiritual teacher. And so I want to tell everyone about you. And
that's very kind, thank you.
And so how can people contact you? You have your website.
Yeah, my website is earthanimalcommunication.co.uk. On there, it has all the different aspects of the work I do, whether it's animal communication, whether it's Greek goddess archetypal work, whether it's spiritual direction, has my artwork there, has my contact details there. So, I do a lot of consultations one-on-one. I'm getting together a newsletter for anyone interested, get a newsletter out. And there will be upcoming courses probably next year now. So if people are interested, keep an eye on the website or get in contact with me. And we can perhaps together do some Zoom.
Let's do some
on any of this work.
The goddess.
Yeah. It's so empowering for women. I mean, to know these goddesses work.
Amazing.
It's incredible stuff.
And you do have a Facebook
page, absolutely.
Animal communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just say your email. for people?
It's Clare Earth Animal at gmail.com. All one word, all lowercase.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Janine.
So much.
Lovely to speak to you. Yes, wonderful,
Okay.
wonderful. And let's do it again in due course. I was going to say do it again soon, but we've had
I would do it again soon, but yeah.
I know. Take care, my lovely.
You
God
too.
bless.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you for watching this conversation between Clare Roper-Paris and myself. I'm sure you understand why I said at the beginning that she's an amazing, wise woman. I hope you are feeling as inspired and empowered by this conversation as I am. If you'd like to support my work, bringing these conversations with amazing, wise teachers of animal communication, bringing us awareness and understanding and teachings with animals, in the nature realms, in all the nature realms, then please consider a donation to help me to continue this work. I've put links to donate in the description of this video, and 25% of your donation will go to the Global White Lion Protection Trust. Thank you for watching.